Hello, and welcome to Candidates Up Front. This is a public interest election program from Berks Community Television and the League of Women Voters of Berks County. I'm Judith Cranus, a member of the League. Our November 8th election is coming up, and we will be voting for state and federal officials. The deadline to register is October 24th, but if you're not registered, please do it now. The League is interviewing candidates, those who have agreed to be interviewed, in contested races. And for each race, the candidates will get the same basic questions and have the same amount of time to answer them. Two candidates are competing in the 6th Congressional District. They are Democrat Chrissy Houlihan and Republican Guy Shiroki. Now, this district is the southern section of Berks County. It stretches all the way from Carnarvon through Exeter, the city of Reading, Wyomissing, and Spring Townships, and south to New Morgan. And it also includes parts of Chester County. The U.S. House of Representatives proposes and passes federal laws, which must also be approved by the U.S. Senate. They act on domestic and international issues. They serve a 2-year term, and they earn $174,000 per year, plus benefits and expenses. Now, please remember that the opinions you hear in this interview are those of the candidate. They're not those of the League of Women Voters nor of Berks Community Television. Today, we are interviewing Chrissy Houlihan. Welcome, Mrs. Houlihan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Please tell our viewers about yourself and why you're running.
Of course, and thank you once again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here for this really important conversation. My name is Chrissy Houlihan, and I am running to hopefully continue to serve our community, the 6th Congressional District, which is Berks and Chester counties. By way of my background, before joining Congress several years ago, I originally was an engineer in school. I am a veteran of the United States Air Force. I'm also an entrepreneur, having grown a lot of businesses in our community over the course of 20 or so years, 25 living in this area. And lastly, was a teacher, an educator in North Philadelphia in chemistry, and ran a nonprofit that focuses on early childhood literacy. So I'm hopeful to be able to continue to use those skills on all of our behalf down in Washington, D.C. Our community is an enormously purple place. It is a very, very diverse mix of peoples of all sorts of political affiliation and all sorts of other sorts of ways to differentiate ourselves from one another. But I think the thing that we have in common is that we all really value things like education, things like really good jobs for one another, the environment and safety. And those are the things that I'm focused on in Washington and hope to continue to focus on in Washington.
Now, you are a Democrat.
I am.
What draws you to the Democratic Party?
Of course, and what's interesting about my background is that I was raised by one Democrat and one Republican, and my parents would traditionally go to the polls together, vote differently than one another, and come home together after the election, and we would always talk about politics at the kitchen table. I associate myself with the Democratic Party because I believe the Democratic Party is a party that very much leads with the values that I think the American people most embody. As I mentioned, issues of making sure that we protect the opportunity for education, the opportunity for great jobs, safe communities and safe environments. And we also balance those policies with making sure that the individual liberties are protected as well. So I'm very, very committed to being a Democrat, but I also very much believe that we need to be able to work across the aisle to be able to accomplish what we need to protect and defend this nation.
Are there things about your party that you're less comfortable with?
Sure, and I think that we should all think hard about kind of what makes us comfortable and not comfortable about any sort of affiliation that we have. One of the things that I've been struck by in the several years I've been in Washington is that we tend to, as a party, at least at the federal level, try to go for what I call the whole loaf. We go for very ambitious and very aggressive change at one time, where I believe that it may be more expedient and more useful to the entire electorate to worry about smaller chunk-size pieces that people can understand. I also think that Democrats in general tend to not speak in the common words of people, and so I think it's very important to try to make sure that we are all speaking the same language, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned before the fact that this is a purple district. Your party's going to want you to vote the party line.
Sure.
That goes. People who voted for you want you to vote their view. People who didn't vote for you still think you should represent them, and you also have your own ideas. How do you balance all that? What's your thinking?
It's really important. This community is, roughly speaking, 40% Democrat, 40% Republican, and 20% Independent. So it's a really unique congressional district. I take my purple district and my purple upbringing really seriously. I have been recently rated as the top 20% most bipartisan members of Congress in both parties. And I also work really hard in the legislative work that I do to make sure that I'm putting forward legislation that's bipartisan, to make sure that I'm supporting legislation that is bipartisan. 75% of the things that I've put forward or supported have been bipartisan coalition-built issues. I also have started a number of caucuses, which are sort of the groups of people that coalesce together over issues. And each one of the caucuses that I have started have been bipartisan caucuses with a purpose to make sure we get things done on behalf of the people.
Thank you. Going to foreign policy, what is important to you there?
I think that as a veteran and a third-generation veteran, national security is something that is core to who I am. I think that when you talk about what's important for foreign policy, you should start with the overarching baseline that foreign policy has a lot to do, if not everything to do, with the security of our homeland. So making sure that we're protecting our homeland through the foreign policy efforts that we do abroad. I am, in addition to being a veteran, I also serve on the Armed Services Foreign Affairs Committees, so I'm very much front and center on these issues in my day-to-day work in Congress. And so what I would say is, important to me in foreign policy is working with our allies. Making sure that we, first of all, have allies is very, very important, and also making sure that in working with our allies that we are making the issues and the threats that are abroad stay abroad so that they don't threaten us here at home. But making sure we're doing that with humanity, with civility and decency to the rest of the globe's citizens as well.
Okay. Now, everyone that I know is pro-life, but they all mean different things by it. Ending gun violence is considered pro-life, preventing climate change, pro-life, protecting endangered species, being against abortion, being in favor of choice on abortion, universal health care, ending the death penalty. All those are often considered pro-life. On which of these issues or other issues do you consider yourself pro-life?
So many of the ones that you've just named, I would say I would consider myself to be pro-life on. I think that one of the ones that you also mentioned bears, talking about, and maybe perhaps in more depth, which is reproductive health and freedoms. We, unfortunately, this election cycle really do have this issue on the ballot here in Pennsylvania and across the country, and I very much believe that this is an issue of personal freedom, that women and their families and their doctors and their faith should be able to make these sorts of decisions for themselves and for their family. And I think that this is very much a position that has to do with the fundamental tenets of our Constitution and the fundamental rights and freedoms of women and their families across the country. You also named a bunch of other ones that I would echo or foot stomp in the parlance of the military, which is health and safety issues, whether gun safety or planet safety issues. Those are all very important as well. And importantly, kind of health issues from birth onwards as well, making sure that we're taking care of whole families and whole people.
Mm-hmm. Now, the U.S. is a first world nation, but with third world statistics for death rates of pregnant women. For every 100,000 women who are pregnant, in Norway, New Zealand, fewer than 2 die. Most of Europe and Australia, fewer than 4. Canada and France, fewer than 9. In the United States, it's 23.8. Those numbers are expected to increase in places that abortion is banned. Should our federal government address pregnancy death rates under the guidelines of that constitutional preamble that we are to promote the general welfare? And what would you suggest we do to get those numbers down?
This is a very big issue. It's an issue that we very much need to address both at the federal level and also state and local levels. I belong, as we talked about, to a variety of different caucuses, which are sort of the clubs that people join in Congress to indicate what they're interested in and to be able to help push legislation forward. I am a member of the Black Maternal Health Caucus, which speaks to the issue of the fact that maternal health, the crisis that you've referred to, is particularly acute amongst communities of color and women of color. And so I very much think that there are things that we can be doing at the federal level to address that. Some of them are making sure that we are providing support for research in this area. One of them you indicated is making sure that we codify Roe to make sure that people have access to safe reproductive health opportunities. One of them is investing, frankly, more in places like Planned Parenthood, which are not exclusively positions for abortions, but frankly also places where people seek and get really good health care, women in particular, of course. Lastly, I would say it's important that at a federal level, and we've done this consistently throughout the pandemic, is supporting community health centers as well. There are many community health centers here in the Reading and Berks County area. I've had the opportunity to visit many of them, and without their basic and fundamental health care outreach and opportunities for women and others, frankly, in our community, we would be in a very, very different place right now as a result of the pandemic. And so I think that there are really important aspects of making sure that we are taking care of the 51% of the population that happen to be women, to make sure that we are able to have safe and healthy births.
In Europe, the religion of the king was the only religion. Now, our founding fathers wanted our government to be neutral on religion. And when Roe v. Wade was decided, it used the medical term viability. Survival outside the womb was the criteria, and that is neutral. Some of the new laws banning abortion are seen by many as enshrining in law a religious view of when life begins. So if you were having a heart-to-heart discussion with someone who felt this was an intrusion on their religious freedom, what would you say to them?
Sure, and I think that this is a terrific question, but I think the other part of the question is we need to be able to have these hard conversations with each other, whether they're about issues of separation of church and state or issues of choice. These are important conversations that we need to have with one another and do it in a civil and decent way. One of the things that we've been focused on in our office is town halls. We've held more town halls than any other Pennsylvanian representative. And in those town halls, we focus very much on civility and decency and talking to one another rather than at one another. And so in this particular case that you've asked me about the separation in the Constitution between religion and the state, really important that we observe that. And as Pennsylvanians and Philadelphians, I would say to this person, we, of all people in the United States, should understand how important it is to continue to observe and respect the separation of church and state. And we, of all people, have the empathy to understand that there are differences in our faiths, and those differences should be respected personally, but the law is very clear on the separation between church and state.
Mm-hmm. Now, if the issue was preventing gun violence and someone said, that infringes on my Second Amendment right to carry guns, in a heart-to-heart discussion, what would you say to them?
Again, I've had these kinds of conversations with our constituency. I very much appreciate that we are a community of gun owners. I believe that we estimate that about 40% of the 6th Congressional District are gun owners. My mother is a gun owner. But I do think that there's an importance when you're talking about the importance of understanding how we can be responsible gun owners and also be a safer community. And so what I talk to people about when I have this conversation is the fact that I am a veteran, and as I mentioned, a third-generation veteran. And I am a former educator, having worked in one of the most difficult school districts and schools in our nation. But we all understand that the safety of our schools, the safety of our children, the safety of our communities is really, really important. And we ought to be able to find a path where we can collectively understand where guns are appropriate, what guns are appropriate, and when they are appropriate. We were able to pass some terrific bipartisan legislation just recently in Congress that addresses this issue exactly. It's called the Safer Communities Act, again, bipartisanly passed in Congress.
Mm-hmm. And we're going right from there into more gun thing, which is the amount of money it costs us. The U.S. spends $557 billion annually because of gun violence. And that includes outfitting and training first responders against new and improved weapons, retrofitting buildings to add security, and health care. And 96% of gun violence-related health care is shouldered by Medicare and U.S. employers through their health insurance plans. It's a cost of doing business. And it does seem that it's an inflationary economic pressure. Should Congress act on this issue? And if so, what do you feel Congress could do to decrease the cost of gun violence?
It's a very complicated and appropriate question to ask. Again, I'll go back to the fact that this is a human conversation and a human issue. The number one cause of death for our young people, for our children right now, is gun violence. And as a mom and as an educator, I find that to be really sobering. You know, we've gone through Uvalde, we've gone through the Tree of Life shootings, and today may not be different than any other day. We may have more mass shootings in our area. We very much need to act. It is certainly an inflationary issue, but as I think importantly for people to understand, it's a human cost issue as well. We need to make sure that we are addressing this in Congress on issues like perhaps the ban of assault rifle or the reenactment of that ban, increasing and enhancing universal background checks, high capacity restrictions, I think are something that I would be supportive of. But we need to also do this in understanding and respecting the role of law enforcement and the importance of making sure that they are able and capable of protecting and defending our communities. There's a very large package of legislation that I'm hoping to be able to vote on as we get back to Washington that helps small and mid-sized police departments, such as many that are in our community, be able to afford the training that they need, mental health support that they need, the equipment that they need, such as body cameras and the like. And I believe that it is a combination of making sure that we are thinking about the root causes and costs, but also what we do in the interim to make sure we're protected as a community.
Mm-hmm. Congress recently passed a bill to address climate change, and it was not bipartisan. Wildfires, floods, drought, these are expensive emergencies to deal with. And then there's the expense of rebuilding. Again, it's an inflationary pressure on our economy. From a cost-benefit perspective, are we doing the right thing?
Sure. I mentioned earlier in the conversation that I'm a former business person, and my background is in something called industrial engineering and supply chain management and that sort of thing. Well, you look at any sort of an investment that we make as a government, and we think about the return on the investment, whether it makes sense to do. I was one of those people who supported this piece of legislation that you're talking about. It was called the Inflation Reduction Act, but a significant part of it has to do with climate, addressing the climate, addressing energy. Listen, when the Pentagon, when the Pope, and when our petroleum companies are all in agreement that climate change is real and that humans are causing it, we need to do something about this. And the investments that we're making right now to protect our communities and protect our planet are very much worth the return and very much have high returns on investment. So I think it's really important that we take a really hard look in the mirror and continue to do what we need to do to be able to protect the planet and our next generations to come. I guess the last thing that I will say is you only have to look around to see the impact of this in our community. Hurricane Ida caused a literal federal state of emergency in our community. A 100-year flood twice in the last couple of years is not a 100-year flood any longer.
Mm-hmm. Companies donate unregulated dollars to political causes as a form of protected free speech. Now, the public can't see these donations. And some say that the fossil fuel company donations influenced legislators to vote no on that recent climate bill. Do you think campaign contributions influence voters? And please tell us what you think about campaign finance laws.
A really important question as well. One of the very first things that we did in the Congress of 2019, which was the first Congress that I was elected into, was pass a piece of legislation out of the House called H.R. 1. It gets the number 1 because it's the most important thing that we did in that Congress. And that number 1 was a piece of legislation about politics and money in politics and ethics in politics. I very much believe that we need to find ways to reduce the influence of money in politics. I am supported by a group called End Citizens United, which is the court case that allows money in politics to exist in this way. And I will continue to, once again, in this particular Congress, in the 117th Congress, I also voted for H.R. 1 yet again. I am hopeful that in what's left of this Congress, and hopefully in subsequent Congresses that I'm allowed to participate in, that I will continue to be able to be a voice on the importance of reducing the influence and impact of money on politics. It is really something that is to not even be believed, having been now in politics for just a few years, to understand how important and insidious that particular influence is.
Please tell us your thoughts on the filibuster.
So what I would say is that there is an importance of respecting each of our roles in government. And in my particular view, the Senate has an enormously complex set of rules and procedures. And in the case of the filibuster, I believe it is their responsibility to understand and decide whether or not they would like to undo the filibuster. I think similarly, whenever I hear people talking about the House and their rules, you have to kind of be inside the machine to at least try to understand it. And many times people are not inside our machine to understand that. So I would respectfully say that I very much hope that the Senate will continue to do good things. They have demonstrated an ability to advance legislation over the last several months that I haven't seen in the first 3 or so years. So hopefully they've found a secret sauce of being able to collaborate and get together without having to address the filibuster issue.
Tell us your thoughts on the Electoral College.
Sure. This is also a similar question. There is a possibility that the Electoral College in its execution has some issues that we can address from a Senate standpoint and from a House standpoint, from a legislative standpoint. The Electoral College is, sort of the law of the land. There are lots of conversations about whether it is still appropriate and still germane. But as it is the current law of the land, I believe there are ways that we as legislators can put guardrails and guidelines in place to be able to make sure that the experience of January 6th in terms of certifying the election won't be able to happen again. I very much support the election of President Biden and the process by which it was done, and very much want to make sure that for future presidents, regardless of party, that we have a much more streamlined and understandable process through the Electoral College. I'm hopeful that when I return to Washington in the next several weeks, that the Senate and the House will be moving forward with some legislation that they have proposed, we have proposed, to be able to provide more clarity on how that process works in the future.
Now, I've noted, having lived in several places, that the ease of registering to vote, the ease of casting my ballot, the power of my vote due to gerrymandering, those things all change when you move state to state. As critical as the vote is to the American concept of democracy, should there be federal standards that protect our vote no matter where we live?
I think it's important to continue to have states be responsible for these particular issues. I believe it's fundamental to the constitutions of the states as well as the federal government. But I also think that it is important that those states not behave in an irresponsible manner and prohibit or prevent people from exercising their right to vote. An example would be that we have mail-in ballots here in Pennsylvania, and we very much want to make sure that we are tracking them and understanding where they're going and that they're getting a priority in the mail. Well, the mail is a federal entity. The U.S. Postal Service is a federal entity. So there may be some role and place in the federal government for this in particular, as an example. So I think it's sort of a case-by-case basis, but I do very much believe that for whatever reason, there seems to be a consistent undermining of people's access to the ballot in certain states that is incredibly worrisome. And frankly, Pennsylvania is one of those states.
Mm-hmm. Now, our founding father, Alexander Hamilton, fought for and set up the Federal Reserve to set monetary policy. It's not in the Constitution, but it is the driving force in handling inflation. Inflation is not a problem that Congress on its own can solve, so we didn't ask you how you would solve that. But that said, should Congress consider the inflationary or deflationary aspects of every bill it considers? And if so, how far forward should we be looking?
I really appreciate the spirit of the question that this is asked with, in the sense that we do have an issue with inflation right now, and I recognize and understand that people are experiencing pressure and pain under this current bout of inflation. It's something that I hear about all the time in our community. And there are things that members of Congress can be doing in a variety of different ways on this, and I hope that I've been part of the solution, and let me be specific about that. I belong to a group of people, again a caucus, that's called the New Dem Coalition. It's the very largest caucus in Congress. It's a group of 100 members of Congress, all Democrats, and we all caucus or meet around the economy, around opportunity in business. We are a pro-business caucus. As part of that group, during the first inflection of inflation, I broke a piece of our group off and we started an inflation working group. And we produced a document, and the document was called by Forbes magazine the most inclusive and a piece of report or a proposal on how to address inflation that Congress has produced thus far. Within that were recommendations of pieces of legislation that would make a difference if we were to pass them. An example would be the piece of legislation which we recently passed on infrastructure. An example would be the Inflation Reduction Act. An example would be the CHIPS and Science Act that has to do with chips manufacturing. These are just some of the recommendations that Congress has made in terms of, that this report made in terms of what we can continue to do to address inflation. And the last thing that I would say is there's still much to be done on this issue, particularly the issue of labor and supply chains. We have an opportunity to pass the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which we have now passed twice bipartisanly in the House, and would encourage the Senate to pass as well, because there's still a lot of work to be done. So in the case of inflation and the role of Congress, there are places that we can have an impact, and I'm working aggressively to make sure that I have the impact that our community would deserve and demand.
Thank you. We have a good minute left. Would you like to make a closing statement?
Again, I want to thank you, Judith, and also the League for organizing this really important conversation. I really am glad to see that people on both sides of the aisle are participating in these conversations, because it's important that every person, every voter, educate him or herself and understand what the issues are and where people stand on the issues before placing that really important vote. I am very, very proud to be our representative down in Washington. I have been, in my hope and opinion, a servant leader for all of my life, trying to serve in one way, shape, or form, whether in the military or in business or as an educator or as a mom and a citizen of our community. And so I'm really hopeful that you all will continue to place your faith in me to continue to serve and represent us down in Washington, D.C. It really genuinely is the privilege and honor of a lifetime to be in that office in this very important and critical time for our nation. I thank you, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Houlihan. Voters, I must remind you that there is another candidate in the race, Mr. Shiroki, and you can see that interview on BCTV's website or YouTube page. Now, to check your voting status, you can go to votepa.gov. It's a secure government site, tells you everything you need to know, helps you through the process, available in Spanish or English, and the forms are available in several additional languages. At that site, you can register, change your party, locate your polling place, or apply for an absentee or the new mail-in ballot. And the deadline to register is October 24th, but you're smart to do it much, much sooner. And if you want a mail-in ballot, that deadline is November 1st, but getting it early would be a good thing. Then you get it back early and you know it's there. To get information for that ballot, check the League's online voter's guide, vote411.org. You can confirm your new voting district. There are new boundaries, but you type in your address, it takes you right to it, and you'll get more information on the candidates. We're hoping these interviews may be linked, and most of them are linking their websites, so you can learn all you want to know. The third thing you can always do is call Berks County Election Services. Very helpful staff, Spanish and English, elections@countyofberks.com, 610-478-6490. Thank you for watching Candidates Up Front.